Mr. Tata, at the outset, personally and on behalf of everybody here, it's a privilege. Thank you so much for sparing your time and joining the non-corporate side of the world, which you've been very nicely supporting for the last few years. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you on behalf of the audience here.
Thank you.
So, I think the start reminds me of a very interesting event or incident when a couple of years back I had taken the liberty of bringing Sachin Bansal to meet you, and like youngsters we were very nervous, and effectively there was deafening silence at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if you remember that in Bangalore, and you broke the ice and made all of us very comfortable to saying, Sachin, it's such a pleasure to meet you. You're amongst fans. I would like to take that same statement and say, on behalf of everybody else, sir, you're amongst fans here, and a big hand to Mr. Tata.
Thank you.
So, if I look at, and I've been doing a little bit of Googling, just to prepare for this session. You've had many successes, many hard decisions which you've taken during your time when you built Tata to where the Tata Group to where it is. It'd be great to know some basic, principles and decision which you based your decisions on, fundamental principles which you based your decisions on. While you were running the Tata Group?
I, in fairness, don't think there are any principles that one follows. Very often in business, you have a difficult situation, you deal with it one way because it seems to call for that, or another way. The only criteria that I have tried to follow rather, is that whatever one does, you should do the right thing. It may not be the easiest thing to do, but if it's the right thing for the situation, that's what you need to pursue. Whether it be relating to manpower, whether it be relating to going out of a business because it's the right thing to do, whichever it is, I think that is the criteria that lets you go to sleep at night thinking you've not done something wrong.
Excellent. No, thank you. That's very valuable advice. If I look back at starting from perhaps 1971, when you turned around National Radio Electronics, and when you took over as the chairman, restructuring some of the Tata Group companies, acquiring Tetley, Jaguar, Chorus, and then launch of the Nano. These were game-changing decisions for the Tata Group. Each one of them represented, as an outsider, very high risk as such. What led you to take such dramatic decisions, which for a corporate of the Tata size and longevity were very high-risk decisions?
I think each one of those was in themselves, again, a situation at that time. If I look back, let's say Jaguar Land Rover, it started in terms of clandestine meetings with the Ford Motor Company that wanted to shed this weight around their neck. And I really thought I was being made the sacrificial goat, because what was I going to do with a failed car company that a company like Ford had not turned around? And finally, there was no way. Sorry, I missed out one very important thing. I was very interested in Land Rover. Mm-hmm. because we made utility and SUVs in India, but not at all interested in having to face whatever one did with Jaguar. But Ford refused to separate the two. So finally, we sort of put our tail between our legs and took the whole company. The first time I walked into the factory, we had a town hall meeting with the staff. They had heard that we were going to convert Coventry into a tandoori chicken center and put restaurants there. Was that a fact? That we were supposed to take the factories to India and produce the cars there. Was that a fact? And standing on my feet with this onslaught, the only thing that came to my mind was to say, look, let's work shoulder to shoulder and put these two brands back to their early glory. Believe it or not, the people of Jaguar Land Rover did just that on their own. Ford did not succeed in making that happen, but the people there just rose to that occasion, and if you went there today, it's a different company. The people are motivated. So you look back on it, and that's something that doesn't get replicated each time. In the case of the Nano, it was a dream. You saw people on a scooter, 4 or 5 family members, and you dreamt about making it safer. And I remember I'm quite a doodler, particularly when board meetings are boring. And I kept on doodling how to make scooters safer, and that led eventually to making a family car that would take care of a family through rain and such safely. I made 2 great enemies in the process. One was the two-wheeler manufacturers, and the other were the car manufacturers that didn't have a car for 1 lakh of rupees. We then had a series of problems of moving factories, a very determined politician who decided that we would not produce the car where we had built a factory. There was a campaign to make this fail. And then we ourselves became rather complacent in the whole thing. We made many mistakes. So the Nano was not as successful as it, in my view, should have been. But it was great to succeed in putting forward a 1 lakh car.
Sure.
That could have been the car that was a people's car for India.
No, excellent. I must tell you, incident which happened when the Nano was taking out. I was leading a company in automotive design, and I was visiting Detroit in one of the leading automotive vendors, and so far we were recognized as IT giants from India, and suddenly I could actually in my previous visits visit the R&D centers, but after the Nano was announced, they said, no, we'll meet you outside the R&D center. So it did shake up the automotive world, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I remember we displayed the car in the Geneva Motor Show.
Motor Show, yes.
And one of the most thrilling things for me was to see Korean or Japanese visitors with measure tapes, sort of looking under the car. I thought, oh, we really caught their attention.
Excellent. Now, again, going back to the acquisitions, and I just want to sort of quickly turn back to the entrepreneurship world. You took risks as a corporate giant when such acquisitions were made. You saw those opportunities. and growing startup companies who've achieved certain scale, do you think acquisitions for them is a good strategy to scale further?
Acquisitions by them?
By startups who've grown to a certain scale. Is that a good strategy for startups to acquire assets, acquire technology during their journey to leadership?
I think if they achieve what they want to, namely to provide scale and or penetration or particular technologies, that's very worthwhile. Mm-hmm. What I think is sad is when a young startup with a good idea has only one motivation, that's to sell his company to a larger company. I think that has always led me to get somewhat turned off. But I think acquiring a company that adds scale or adds depth of management, I think is fine.
Any advice on learnings from integration? You said how Jaguar was a changed company. Any advice for late-stage startups who are acquiring on the magic of integration?
No, I don't profess to have advice over there. I think one thing that is necessary is need the motivation of the people and a feeling that they can achieve success. I think that applies to startups, it applies to big companies. There needs to be a sense of pride in the company they belong to. If it's a startup, it's easier than it is in a bigger company. But I think that's a fundamental requirement.
Now, if I look at the decisions of acquisitions or the major decisions and then the Tata Nano, in our head, at least in my head, the earlier were acquisitions, and the Tata Nano was a high-risk decision based out of a need which you saw. It was risk and innovation. It was a combination of risk and innovation. Do you see a lot of innovation in the entrepreneurial world in India? Is it disruptive? What do you see as you meet entrepreneurs today?
We don't seem to have as many really disruptive startups in India as you might see overseas. You have some. As I said a few minutes ago in the other room, unfortunately, we don't have an environment where somebody says, you have a great idea, you need to be supported. In fact, over here we have instead an attitude of, he's wasting our time, we don't need to have this, we can do well with what we have. And usually it's that protectionist instinct all over again.
Sir, when you stepped down from the Tata chairman position, we were watching you as outsiders, and we suddenly saw you enter the world of entrepreneurship. And I must add, at least to me, that was like, that's interesting, Mr. Tata's entering the world of entrepreneurship. You suddenly met a lot of people, and suddenly we saw a spate of, you're backing a few entrepreneurs, etc. What made you enter the world of entrepreneurship from the corporate world after you stepped down as the chairman?
I was always attracted to young people who had the willingness and the motivation to start something new. It was something that I had an interest in when it happened in the United States and in India too. But unfortunately, working in Tata's, I was in conflict with one or another Tata company if I made an investment, so I never could. After I retired, I felt I was a free agent and could do so.
Excellent. We've seen some of those entrepreneurs and met some of them are in our portfolio, and certainly when they meet you, it's magical. I've had the opportunity of spending time with you at least once a quarter, and very valuable advice, I must say that.
Thank you.
Startups go through a startup phase, a growth phase, and while growing, it's a mix of market opportunity being tapped and capital overall. And so, are there any, in the companies which you invested in, are there any things which you think entrepreneurs should do in particular to scale up rapidly, or something which they have not done so far? What would be your advice on growing those companies on a constant basis?
I've realized, first of all, that I'm not the person to advise them. I'm still learning. I'm still learning how businesses that look absolutely undoable to me become great successes, and others that seem to be successful ideas don't. And again, it goes back to the people, it goes back to the founders and the motivation they have and the conviction they have on the ideas that they've created.
Now, most of your investments were the consumer internet space. Is there any reason for that?
In which space?
In the consumer internet space?
Yeah.
Most of your investments and most of your backing of entrepreneurs is in that space as such. Was there any reason for that, or are you looking at new sectors?
No, I think India is such a big country with this huge marketplace, and e-commerce and the new trends of marketing open India to the Indian market to goods and services that they didn't have before. So to me, this was an enormous change that was taking place in India, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Any sectors which you think are emerging, which are great opportunities to back in the next 5 years?
The one that I am most excited about is medical research. I think India is poised to play a big role in some of the discoveries. And in the 10 years that we have ahead of us, we may well see diseases that were terminal being treatable instead. And much of the work could have been done in India. The entry cost is not that high. The manual skills or mental skills are available in India. And we can start collaboratively, but I think India will be one of the centers of biological or biosciences in the future.
On the software side, India has done very well on the software services side for many, many years. A number of companies, revenues above 10 billion, market caps above 20 billion. What do you think is the future of software products from India?
Oh?
Software products in the SaaS and the cloud space.
I don't know what you mean by software products, because I think the future is going to lie in algorithms which will be self-programming, the artificial intelligence, which are all, in a manner of speaking, software products.
Sure.
But they will, in many ways, replace the human inputs. Autonomous cars today are one example of that. We look at the end product, but that is a series of software products, series of algorithms, artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, and as you go through all, finally going towards driving a car as you and I would, hopefully.
Now, automated pattern recognition, automation, artificial intelligence. One last question. India is generating 1 million people who come to the workforce, young people, every month right now. That's what I read. And is growing at 6% per annum. But automation is something which is also a reality. How can India deal with this conflict of providing jobs and on one side and rapid automation on the other side?
I think India has a tremendous requirement of infrastructure. And if you look at massive public works, they will theoretically employ tens of thousands of people across India. That's one bucket. The other bucket is the technology heavy involved people, where we are graduating young people with skills. And that's another bucket that we can grow if we do what people like you are trying to do, to encourage the creation of high technology
companies,
enterprises in the country. Somewhere it'll come together at a later point in time, complementing each other.
And if you look at the government has had a lot of startup focus in the last two to 3 years. Do you think government's involvement is essential to create that startup ecosystem, or government, like in the software industry, government stayed away?
That's hard to tell. Government organizations in the US, like DARPA, have put out money to undertake research in certain technologies in the billions of dollars,
right,
which have created enterprises. NASA has done the same in space. So I guess my answer would be yes, the government should and could play a major role in this, provided they have the they embody the entrepreneurial spirit that would be necessary.
One last question. If you look at China and if you look at India, at a high level, China in the technology space does not have an Amazon, does not have Google, does not have many of the international players. But in India, it's an open market. China has given rise in the last 15 years to many large players who are like Google, like Yahoo, like WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. Do you think it's fair play? Do you think global competition gives rise to better companies, better entrepreneurs? Do you think more and more Googles will happen in India as we move forward? Any comments on that?
More and more do.
Googles will come out from India in spite of global competition here?
I visualize that there's no reason why two smart people at Stanford could produce a search engine that it couldn't happen in India. The thing we need to be concerned about is, can we create an environment where you applaud people for that rather than hold them back? If a young person has a chance to make a success of what he undertakes to do, and he doesn't have to fight roadblocks to get there, I think you'll see more happening in India than you do. What unfortunately is happening is very often the young person with the spark gives up in India and goes
to the US. Yeah.
Goes to the US. If we create an environment where he can be motivated here, and that requires a community of investors and capitalists who take the risk and be with the startup, then I think you'll get it here too.
Sure. And that started to happen at this moment. That's starting to happen right now.
Yeah. But it cannot be the typical bankable project, it has to be risk-bearing.
Risk-bearing, yeah.
And there will be failures, and those failures will in themselves be lessons that will lead to successes at a later point in time.
Mr. Tata, thank you so much. Based on this advice, at least we are encouraged. There'll be many, many more successful companies, young startups, high risk, high tech, emerging from India, which are world beaters.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'd just like to say that you and people like you need to keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.